Right, today in geometry, we're looking at the next part of section 8.4, properties of rhombuses and squares. Yesterday, we talked about rectangles. So let's start out with what is a rhombus. A rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. So a quadrilateral is a rhombus if and only if it has 4 congruent sides. So AB is congruent to BC, is congruent to CD, is congruent to DA. Then I can say it is a rhombus. Okay? So properties of a rhombus are theorems. If a quadrilateral is a rhombus, then it's a parallelogram. So all the properties of our parallelograms. So we would have to know that AB is parallel to DC and AD is parallel to BC. So both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. Then we look at our diagonals. We have to know that our diagonals bisect each other. So AX is congruent to CX and BX is congruent to DX. Then we have to know opposite angles are congruent. So angle A congruent to angle C and angle B congruent to angle D. And then we also need to know that our 4 pairs of consecutive interior angles are supplementary. So the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B equals 180. The measure of angle B plus the measure of angle C equals 180. The measure of angle C plus the measure of angle D equals 180. And finally, the measure of angle D plus the measure of angle A is also equal to 180 degrees. Right, so we know that it has to be a parallelogram, so all our properties of parallelogram apply. And now we also know that if a parallelogram is a rhombus, then its diagonals are perpendicular. So we're going to call this point E, where all of our diagonals intersect. So then I would know that AC is perpendicular to BD. All right, so turn it over. We also know if a parallelogram is a rhombus, then each diagonal bisects a pair of opposite angles. So we would know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, angle 3 congruent to angle 4, angle 5 congruent to angle 6, and angle 7 congruent to angle 8. Okay. So now we're going to talk about what makes a square. A square is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. So properties of a square. If a quadrilateral is a square, then it is a rhombus and a rectangle. A quadrilateral is a square if and only if it is a rhombus and a rectangle. So it has all the properties of a rhombus, all the properties of a rectangle, as well as all the properties of a parallelogram. Okay, so the first one, we would know that opposite sides are parallel. So AB parallel to DC, BC parallel to AD. And we know that our diagonals bisect and are congruent, because remember on a rectangle, our diagonals are congruent. So AC is congruent to BD. Then we know that they bisect each other as well. So AX is congruent to CX, BX congruent to DX, because our diagonals bisect each other. But we also know that in the rhombus, the diagonals are perpendicular. So then we also know that AC is perpendicular to BD, and that the diagonals bisect those angles. So angle 1 congruent to angle 2, angle 3 congruent to angle 4, angle 5 congruent to angle 6, angle 7 congruent to angle 8. All those properties makes up a square along with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. So let's look at properties of a rhombus, properties of a square. Okay? So a rhombus, all the properties of a parallelogram plus 4 congruent sides. The diagonals bisect angles and the diagonals are perpendicular. A square, all the properties of a parallelogram, plus all the properties of a rectangle, plus all the properties of a rhombus. A square has everything. So all the properties that we have learned about is a square. So then I just put a Venn diagram. So in the great big, we have quadrilaterals. These are four-sided polygons. Then we have parallelograms. Inside parallelograms, we have rhombus, squares, and rectangles. A rectangle can be a rhombus can be a rectangle, but not all rhombuses are rectangles, not all rectangles are rhombuses. Notice that squares cover both of them. All squares are rhombuses, rectangles, and parallelograms. All rhombuses are parallelograms, all rectangles are parallelograms. So now we're going to use all of those properties and work out some problems. So QRST is a square. Find the value of the variables. This should just be 3a plus 22. That's what that is right there. All right, so a square. Right, so if it's a square, I know all four of my sides are congruent to each other. So I can go ahead and set this up and say 3a plus 22 has to equal 5a plus 4. Get all of my a's on the same side, so subtract 3a, so I get 22 equals 2a plus 4. Subtract 4 from both sides, so then I get 18 equals 2a. Divide everything by 2, I find a is equal to 9. So when a equals 9, that proves that those sides are congruent. Now what do I know about my angles of a square? All that they gave me was angle T was 8b plus 2. Remember, in a square, I know all of these are right angles. So I would set that up and say 8b plus 2 is equal to 90. Subtract 2 from both sides, so I get 8b equals 88. Divide by 8, b equals 11. So if I know that's a square, then the value of a is 9, the value of b is 11. All right, next problem. It says the diagonals of rhombus ABCD intersect at point E. If angle BAC is 53, so let's label that BAC, this is 53 degrees, and DE is 8, this is 8, then find the following. All right, so let's go ahead and just, before we even look at 1 through 6, what they want us to find, let's go ahead and label everything that we know. So if it's a rhombus, remember rhombus, I know that my diagonals have been bisected. So if that side is 8, this side is also 8. But remember, I also know that my diagonals bisected these angles. So if that angle is 53, this is also 53. And these are the same up here, 53 and 53. And then I also know that my diagonals are perpendicular. So I know that all of these are 90. All right, so that's everything that I know based off of what they gave to me. So now let's see if we can solve this 1 through 6. So number 1, it says find the measure of angle DAC. BAC, look at that. That's already one that we've labeled, 53 degrees. Find the measure of angle AED. AED, that's this angle right here. Again, I've already labeled that's a 90 degree because that's where my diagonals intersect. Because diagonals are perpendicular. Number 3, the measure of angle ADC. ADC, this whole angle down here. I know that my angles, all three in a triangle, have to add up to equal 180. So if I have this triangle right here, I can say 90 minus 53 equals that little angle in there. So this little angle is 37, but remember that they have to be the same. So 37 plus 37 would be the whole great big angle of 74 degrees. All right, so then number 4, find DB. Well, DB, again, that's something that I've already labeled as 8. Find AE, so A to E. So let's draw that picture out. So Number 5, I'm going to draw out AE. So this is the picture I have in here. This is A, this is D, this is E. I know this is my right angle. I know that DE is 8. I know that this angle is 53. And I know that this angle is 37. And I'm looking for AEX. I'm just going to stand here at this angle. I have opposite and adjacent, that's tangent. So we're using SOHCAHTOA because I have a right angle. So I can say tangent of 37 equals x over 8. Cross multiply, 8 times the tangent of 37 equals x. So when I type that in my calculator, 8 times the tangent of 37, I get x is approximately 6.02. So AE is approximately 6.02. So now, number 6, find AC. AC is going to be AE plus EC. AE we just found to be 6.02. EC would have to be the exact same thing, so 6.02 plus 6.02 is approximately 12.04 for AC. Let's look at this next one. The diagonals of square LMNP intersect at K. LK equals 1, so this is 1. Find the following. Again, let's label everything that we know. If it was a square, all of these started out being 90. These are all 90 as well. My diagonals are all the same, so if that's 1, that's 1. I know that my diagonals bisected angles, so if this was 90, 90 cut in half, all of these little angles in here are 45s. Okay. So number 1 says, find the measure of angle MKN. MKN, that's where diagonals intersect, 90 degrees. Number 2, find the measure of angle LMK. LMK, we just marked that as 45 degrees. Find the measure of angle LPK. It's this one down here. That's also going to be 45. Number 4, find K to N. Look, we've labeled KN as 1. Number 5, find MP, that whole diagonal. I know that each of these are 1 as well, so 1 plus 1 is 2. And number 6, find LP. All right, so LP, so we'll look at number 6 here. If I just pull out this triangle, that's 45, that's 45. This is LPN. I know that this is 2. It's a 45, 45, 90 triangle, okay? I have my hypotenuse. I'm looking for this leg over here. Remember that my hypotenuse in a 45, 45, 90 is supposed to have a square root of 2. This one does not. So that means that I'm going to divide this by what it was missing. So this is going to be 2 divided by the square root of 2. I can't have a radical in the bottom, so I multiply top and bottom by that radical. So now on top, I have 2 square roots of 2 over just 2. Those 2's cancel, and I'm left with the square root of 2. So now I know that all of the side lengths of this square are the square root of 2. All right, let's go to our next page. Classify the quadrilateral and explain your reasoning. So this is where I told you I'm going to give you a picture, and you have to tell me what is this? Which quadrilateral is this? Okay, so let's just label what do I know. So right off the bat on this first one, I know I have 4 congruent sides. I do not have any right angles. The only 2 quadrilaterals that we've talked about that have 4 congruent sides are a rhombus and a square. A square has 4 right angles. Since this picture only has 4 congruent sides and no right angles, therefore I would say this is a rhombus. Let's look at the next one. I have 2 pairs of adjacent sides congruent. So I have 2 congruent adjacent sides. I have opposite angles congruent. Right, so if I have opposite angles congruent, then I know I've got parallelogram rhombus. So rhombus right now is the top one that I've got. I don't have enough to say that this is a rectangle or a square because I don't know that those angles are 90. So all that I can say here is that this is a rhombus. Next set. For any rhombus, QRST, decide whether the statement is always or sometimes true. Draw a figure and explain your reasoning. So any rhombus, QRST. It says the measure of angle Q would be congruent to the measure of angle S. Is that going to be always, sometime, always, or sometimes true? Well, what kind of angles are these? These are opposite angles, so this is going to be always true because one of my properties of a rhombus are opposite angles congruent. Number 2 says measure of angle Q is congruent to measure of angle R. Well, in order to be a rhombus, I have to have opposite angles congruent. I can have all 4 angles congruent. That's going to happen if it's a square or a rectangle, and they're all 90. So this would be sometimes. Only if it's a square or a rectangle. Would those 2 angles have to be the same? Okay, and they would have to equal 90. Right, the next one, for any rectangle EFGH, so let's draw a picture of a rectangle, EFGH. Is it sometimes or always true that FG is congruent to GH? Okay, a rectangle, the opposite sides have to be congruent. It can have all 4 sides, so this would be sometimes, and that would only happen when it is a square or a rhombus. Those are the ones that have 4 congruent sides. The next one, a quadrilateral has 4 congruent sides and 4 congruent angles. Sketch the quadrilateral and classify it. Okay, so 4 congruent sides and 4 congruent angles. My only option are that those are all 90s, right? Because if it's a quadrilateral, all 4 have to add up to equal 360. And so my only option here is this is a square. So now it says draw a square and list everything you know about it. Okay, so here's my picture of my square. All 4 sides are the same, all right angles. So what's everything I know about a square? I know it's a quadrilateral. I know it's a parallelogram. I know it's a rectangle. So now all the properties of those. So I know that I have opposite sides congruent. I have opposite sides parallel. I have opposite angles congruent. I have 4 congruent 90-degree angles. I have consecutive interior angles supplementary. I know that my diagonals bisect each other. I also know that my diagonals are congruent. And I also know that my diagonals are perpendicular. And I know that my diagonals bisect angles. The next one, draw a rhombus and list everything you know about it. So here's my rhombus. Again, I know it's a quadrilateral. I know it's a parallelogram. I know that I have opposite sides congruent and parallel. 4 congruent sides. I have opposite angles congruent. I have consecutive angles supplementary. My diagonals bisect each other. My diagonals bisect the angles. And my diagonals are perpendicular. That's everything I know about a rhombus. All right, so those are our notes on properties of a rhombus and a square. That takes care of all of section 8.4. All that's left to learn about in this chapter are kites and trapezoids.